Alright, welcome to the iPad Storybook Page tutorial series. In this tutorial I'm going to show you a couple different ways to modify the properties of your buttons to find out where you want them in your project. So when we look at the Storybook demo control panel, for each of my buttons, the next button, the previous button, and the menu button, and the interactive button, they all have properties for the width and the height, that's the size in pixels, and then the X and Y coordinates. Now the X and Y coordinates are going to be of the upper left hand corner of your button. So you can see that I've already predetermined these for my project, but I'm going to show you how I can do that. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to do it in Photoshop. So when I open up Photoshop, you can see my demo page here, and in my demo I use this little wasp or bee or whatever it is, and I wanted that to be where the interactive button was. So I'll show you how to find the X and Y coordinates and the height and width of a button, and then you could do that same process for the menu button and then the next page and previous page buttons. So what I've got here is just a standard. I just dragged or opened up my Storybook page. This is just a single 1024 by 800 image, and I'm going to add a second layer on here so that I can drag a button on. So I'm just going to use the rectangle tool, and I'm just going to draw a rectangle over where I want the hotspot to be. So once I do that, I can see here that that's going to be where my hotspot is. So I'm going to use the transition tool, or Command T on a Mac, that lets me stretch this around, but if I'm happy with where it's at, I don't need to stretch it. But what this does is it gives me the properties right up here in the toolbar. Now, important thing to remember about these properties is that they're anchored depending on what spot you have here. So you can see that this is center anchored now. So I'm going to reference it to the upper left hand corner because that's what the plugin is looking for. So once I shift this little black box here to the upper left hand corner, you can see now I've got my X and my Y coordinates in pixels. So it says it's 3 pixels on your X, so 3 pixels from the left side, and then 250 pixels from the top edge. So those are the exact numbers that you're going to load into your properties in the control panel. Now the width and height, normally when you use this, the width and height are going to be set to %, so that if you were stretching it, then you would know what percentage you were stretching it. That's just how Photoshop defaults to. But you can right click or control click in here and select pixels for each of those width and height, and get the exact amount of pixels, in this case 79 pixels wide and 96 pixels high. So once you get all that information, put that into your control panel, and that'll be perfect for your button. Now if you're using different buttons for your next page and previous page buttons like I did, then I would go ahead and just load those graphics on, drag them onto the layer somewhere, get the height and width from them, and then use the same way to find the X and Y position of your upper left hand corner, remembering always to choose this anchor point. Alright, so that's one way you could do it in Photoshop or pretty much any image editing program. If you don't have Photoshop or you want to do it in Xcode, you can do it. It's not quite as easy, but it's possible. So I'm going to open up my Xcode project, and in my plugins folder I see my iPad Storybook Page Plugins, and there we've got the 3 files that make it work. I'm going to select this nib file or .xib file, and you're going to get this iPad looking screen here. Now you might not be able to see the buttons depending on how yours looks. You can see that my buttons are all kind of missing, but if you can't see them, if they're invisible, then what we're going to do is click on this file owner and then click on this button here, and you'll see all of our buttons are right here, and when I hover over them you can see where they appear. So let's say in this case I wanted to modify my menu button. So I hover over my menu button, I can see that it's in that upper left hand corner, and now I know where to actually tap the screen to grab it. So when I come back over here and grab it, now I can see that I have the properties for my menu button, and you can see the outline of it right here. So we're going to go into the inspector for the size and position, and this right here is going to give us our X and Y coordinates and our width and height. So if I wanted to drag this button over to the upper right hand corner, I could just grab onto it and drag it over and drop it down somewhere, and I can see my X and Y coordinates have changed a little bit. I can stretch it out, and you can see that's changing my height and width. And when I get it where I want it, then I'm just going to use these values right here. Now, in order to do this, probably a little bit more valid is you'd probably want to take this UI image view and probably assign it your image. So if I look at my images, and I see I've already dragged in my 2 background images, then I can probably go ahead and select one of those and get that loaded in there. And then when I'm modifying the buttons, I can see exactly where it's going to be. You can do the same thing for the buttons, where I can take the button that I'm trying to manipulate and change the image of it so it actually shows up on there, and it might give you a little better control. But in most cases, I just use Photoshop. Well, thank you for watching this tutorial, and as always, if you have any questions, just find me in the forum.